This is how you make the easiest and most delicious homemade bread, which requires absolutely no kneading and only 3 ingredients. To start off, get yourself a large mixing bowl, and then we're going to add in 440 grams or 3 cups of bread flour. Now, I get asked a lot in the comments what bread flour is, and essentially bread flour is a high protein flour, which typically ranges between 11 and 13% protein content. The higher protein creates more gluten, which adds to the texture, stretch and elasticity, allowing your bread to rise high instead of blobs that fall flat. Now, bread flour is not always called bread flour. It depends on where you're located. Other names it goes by is strong flour, hard flour, or baker's flour. But luckily for you, if you can't find high protein flour, all-purpose will do just fine. Just make sure that it's not self-raising flour. Anyway, let's get back to the recipe. Give your flour a whisk to remove any lumps, and then next we're going to add in a whole sachet of instant or fast action yeast. A whole sachet is roughly 1 tablespoon, or it is for mine anyway, so you may just want to measure out 1 tablespoon to be on the safe side. And now we're going to add in 1 teaspoon of cooking salt to the bowl, and when I say cooking salt, I mean sea salt or kosher salt. And the reason we don't use table salt is due to how fine the grains are, and that it will be too overpowering for this recipe. Now let's give all of those dry ingredients a good whisk to ensure it's fully incorporated. And then next we're going to add in 330 millilitres or 1.5 cups of very warm water. Now when I say warm, I do not mean boiling water. Just add in hot water from the tap and you should be able to hold your finger in the water. If you have a thermometer, you are looking for 45 to 55 degrees Celsius or 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Make sure that it doesn't go over 55 degrees Celsius or 130 degrees Fahrenheit, otherwise it will just burn the yeast. Using the handle of the spoon, mix the water with the dry ingredients until there is no visible flour when you're done mixing. Now what you're looking for is the dough to be a sticky consistency, so not too wet and not too dry. If you're finding that the dough is too wet, add in a small amount of flour at a time. And if it's too dry, add in a touch of water. Now mine was a tad too dry, so I just had to add a very small amount of water, but just make sure that you're adding in small amounts of flour or water at a time, as you don't want to change the measurements of the recipe and ruin the outcome. Your dough should look something like this. It should be sticky and unable to handle by hand. Make sure that you get all of the excess dough from the side of the bowl back into the middle. Now we're going to cover the bowl with a tea towel or something similar and let proof for around 1 to 2 hours, and then we'll come back and see how we're doing. So it's been just under 1.5 hours and my dough is looking really good. I know it's ready, as I can see it's doubled in size, has lots of air holes over the top, and it's wobbly like jelly. This is exactly what you're looking for. If yours doesn't look like this, do not panic. Just leave it for another 30 minutes, come back and check on it again. And now that our dough is ready to go, let's start preheating our oven. And for this recipe, we're going to set the fan oven to 230 degrees Celsius or 450 degrees Fahrenheit. Now I know this sounds high, but trust me, this is where you need it to be. Now, going back over to our dough, we want to remove the dough from the sides of the bowl to make it easier to handle. So grab yourself a spoon or a fork and just start putting it away from the side of the bowl and bringing it into the middle. And make sure you also go underneath the dough to release it from the base and try and get it into a ball-like shape. Now grab yourself a handful of flour and flour your surface well. Then we're going to remove the dough from the bowl and place it on top of the flour. And when you handle the dough, I'd recommend rubbing flour into your hands or wetting your hands with water, as it's going to be really sticky and difficult to manage without that. We're going to fold the dough 4 times from each side like this. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now this is a no-knead recipe, so all we're doing is shaping the dough at this point. And before you say it, no, this is not kneading, this is just shaping. I also like to tuck and turn the dough to create a ball shape like this. You cannot really go wrong with this recipe, so just don't worry too much about the shape. It will still be absolutely delicious. Now, using the bowl that you mix the dough in, place it over the top of the shaped dough and let it proof for a further 15 minutes. Now, whilst the dough is doing its final proof, we need a pot to bake the bread in. Now, if you have a Dutch oven, this will work best and the method is the exact same. However, I'm going to be using a stainless steel pot. You can use any oven-proof pot as long as it has a lid and it's a good size. You don't want the dough to be pressing on the lid as it cooks. Now, place your pot into the preheated oven for 15 minutes to heat up. After 15 minutes, your dough should look something like this. It should look more full and airy, which is exactly what we're looking for. Next, you're going to need some baking paper, you might know as parchment paper, and then using a dough scraper or a spatula, transfer the dough over to the baking paper. Now flour the surface of the dough and rub that all around. And you can also gently shape the dough again at this point, but just make sure that you don't press the air out. And now, if you want to score, this would be the time to do it. But if you're like me and art is not your thing, if you score the top and mess it up, like I did here, don't panic and throw it away. If you'd like to do it again to make it look prettier, all you need to do is stretch and fold the dough several times, reshape it like we did before, and then let it proof for 15 minutes again. And there you have it. You can now score and make your bread look however you'd like it to look. It's now time to remove your heated pot from the oven and then holding the edges of the baking paper, carefully transfer your dough into the pot. Make sure that the baking paper isn't sticking into the side of the dough. You may need to carefully push it away from the edges of the dough. Now place on the lid and pop it into the oven. We're going to bake for 30 minutes with the lid on, and then after 30 minutes we're going to take the lid off and bake for a final 10 minutes or until beautifully golden brown. Now you won't like this part, but before you get the butter out and start digging in, place the bread onto a cooling rack for 15 minutes or at least 10 minutes if you can't wait that long, and I promise it will still be hot after this time. The reason we do this is the middle will be boiling hot, and if you cut into it without letting it cool, it will be all gummy in the centre, which you really don't want. After you've let it cool, you're ready to start cutting into your freshly baked bread and tucking in. Now just take a second to appreciate this beautiful crisp. I really hope you enjoyed this recipe. If you did, please hit that like and subscribe button to see more recipes like this. My goal is to help home cooks become more confident in the kitchen by providing you with easy to follow recipes and cooking techniques. If you have any questions or any requests, pop them in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer. And then that's it.